I'm so excited to present our panel that's coming up now today. We have such wonderful legislative programming, and it's kicking off with the House Office of the Whistleblower Ombuds. They are an office that is nonpartisan. They support everybody in the House of Representatives, and our subscribers have been incredibly active on this. They were given the opportunity to contact their House of Representatives and let them know that they want to have them show up for this fireside chat. They want to make sure that their House of Representatives is able to handle whistleblower tips. Over 100 letters were sent to members of the House of Representatives, so I hope some of you are here. Thank you so much for showing up. If you are here, after the fireside chat, you'll be joined by the North American Securities Administrators Association. You'll hear from them, and then finally, I'll be back, and Senator Grassley will come up next. So I'm going to give the stage over to the fireside chat with the House Ombuds. And thank you so much all for being here. See you soon.
Thank you, Siri. All right, we are thrilled to be here. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be following Siri's opening remarks. And we have a great lineup for you all today. We were hoping to be doing this in person together in a hearing room, but of course, hearings and votes take precedent. So thanks, folks, for being flexible who are joining us. And let's go ahead and just kick it off by really expressing appreciation back to Siri and Steve and the whistleblower rights community who has brought these events together. It takes an immense amount of work behind the scenes, we realize, to hold whistleblower appreciation gatherings. It's through this great programming that NWC has put together. It's through the Whistleblower Summit and Film Festival that folks like Marcel Reed and Michael McRae are putting together. It's happening all week. And we feel really privileged to be plugging into it through our perch here in Congress. So with that, let's just take another moment to pause and recognize why we're here today. We heard it from Siri and Steve, but this date and this programming is all about honoring whistleblowers, right? And for Congress, this is particularly important because whistleblowers are our best line of defense when it comes to preventing and tackling waste, fraud, and abuse. Just last week, folks may have heard headlines around the Labor Department whistleblower. This was a confidential individual who came forward, and his or her, we don't know, but this individual's disclosures helped to reveal that there were nearly $500 million in government fines that hadn't yet been received. And this was all due to some software glitch, right? It was something that could have been prevented. And now those fines are being recovered. In fact, I think some of those fines are due to the House of Representatives. So a direct kind of stake here that we have in this individual's disclosures. Now, we could go on and on with the ways in which we benefit from working with whistleblowers as an institution, the way Congress does. But we want to also just pause and recognize that these are the individuals who have to live with the consequences of their disclosures, right? We as Congress, we as the public, we reap the rewards of them coming forward, but they may have their life changed when they make this step. This is, for that reason, probably one of the most difficult decisions that they're going to make throughout their career. And as folks probably watching today can attest to, many don't feel it is a decision when they come forward. They may think they're simply doing their jobs, right? They're raising a concern to their boss. It's part of their job duties, or they can't turn a blind eye to something because they believe in upholding their organization's mission. The fact of the matter is, this is probably one of the most difficult decisions they are going to make, and they come forward because they're committed. They're committed to protecting their institutions. Now, whether it's a constituent who's reaching out to their member of Congress seeking support, right, maybe supporting guidance throughout this process, or a potential source for a committee, whatever the circumstance may be, by the time they reach out to Congress, it's probably because they haven't been able to have an impact internally. And they need some support, and therefore they need to have trust in the process. They need to trust that when they contact their member of the relevant committee, their disclosures are going to be taken seriously and that they're going to be protected in the process. For the staff that we serve here in Congress, for the House staff, they need to have confidence when they're on the receiving end, right? When they're receiving these disclosures, they need to feel like they have the tool, the education, and the guidance to properly respond to the concerns that whistleblowers are raising. This can be scary, you know, if you're maybe a new staffer to an office and you're picking up the phone and it sounds like it could be a whistleblower issue and you're not sure where to start. Or by nature, whistleblowing is contentious, right? These are individuals raising concerns in their workplace, and for that reason, our office was established. So that's where we come in. We're the House Office of the Whistleblower Ombuds. We're a nonpartisan independent support office. And our role is to advise the House, whether it's a staffer in a member office or a committee, or whether it's the members themselves. We're here to advise them on best practices when they're working with whistleblowers. And this could be whistleblowers from the public or the private sectors. That's why we were brought into existence, and we were brought into existence with bipartisan support from the Committee on House Administration and the Whistleblower Protection Caucus. There's a ton of bipartisan support when it comes to protecting whistleblowers that we can go into further, but we're an example of that. And with that, I want to acknowledge the two individuals with the Committee on House Administration who are with us today and helped to make it possible for our office to be successful and effective. They probably didn't know we were going to ask them to speak at this fireside chat when they established or helped to stand up our office, but we're thrilled to have them. And I couldn't think of two individuals who are frankly more invested in the success of the House as an institution, and in making sure that staff have the tools they need to do their jobs effectively than these two. So let me take a moment to introduce Khalil Abboud, our Deputy Staff Director with the Democratic Office for the Committee on House Administration, and Tim Monahan, our Staff Director with the Republican Office for the Committee on House Administration. Really excited to have you both here today. And then I also just want to take a moment to introduce my team, Becca Jones, our Deputy Director for the Whistleblower Ombuds Office, and John Whitty, our Deputy Director of Operations. Nothing we do would be possible without the work of them. So with that, we're really excited to have today's discussion. I know that was a kind of a lengthy intro here, but we wanted to make sure that we properly set the stage for what we're going to be talking about, which is how Congress can effectively partner with whistleblowers to advance its oversight work, and the importance of institutionalizing best practices for that working relationship. So we're going to share some tips along those lines. We're going to hear from folks on this call, and I'm going to start by posing a question to Khalil and Tim to get things going. So the first question here is around why our office was needed, why you felt its establishment was important, and kind of what void we're working to fill. And that's all in the context of, from your perch on CHA, making sure that the House is able to run smoothly, and that staff have the resources they need to do their job. So I'll pass it over to you all.
Thanks, Shanna, and I really appreciate you pulling this together and having Khalil and I on here. And as you said, this has been a extremely bipartisan effort. And Khalil was the one, I remember a couple of years, came to me and said, hey, we're going to do this and we want you guys on board. And it's been that way ever since. But to answer your question, you know, as many of the folks watching may know, the House is a very decentralized place. And as such, there are not best practices that are implemented across the board on a number of things, including this area, the very, very importance of proper protections for whistleblowers. And so from my perspective, that was the need. And I think that's why this office was pursued and eventually stood up. And I think since you guys have been in place and as the team has been put together through education assistance, you guys have proven the value proposition of why your office was needed to be the central hub to ensure that every single office and committee does have the tools they need to properly interact with whistleblowers. So I think that was the goal. And from my perspective, you guys are well on your way to meeting that goal.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim, and thanks everybody watching, and thanks to Shanna John and Becca, when the office was stood up, it was just 5 lines of legislative text in HRES 6, the rules package, and at a modest appropriation. And that's all fine and good, but really what makes this office are the people. And, we hired Becca, and Tim and I are very proud of the search we ran to secure Becca to run the office. And then Becca brought Shanna brought John and Becca on. And since then, it's been one of the smoothest operations in the house, and a place where things don't generally run very smoothly. But there was a void. The house is over 200 years old. We had never had this really formalized education effort when it comes to whistleblower intake and handling. And that void is filled. It's been filled very, very capably by Shanna and her team. And whistleblowing is incredibly important, but in all areas, but particularly to the House, it helps the House, the members, and our committees execute their Article 1 responsibilities of oversight and legislation in ways that the other sort of tools we have available to us wouldn't. So, and that helps the work that Shannon and her team do to make sure that disclosures are handled properly is incredibly important to that effort.
Thank you. Thank you both. We'll say it time and again, it wouldn't be possible to do what we do without having the close coordination of committed staff and the Committee on House Administration and throughout this institution. A lot of folks are working hard behind the scenes and don't get the credit they deserve, but they're working through a pandemic and through threats at the Capitol. So it's a team effort. In that respect, I do want to kick it over to Becca and John to kind of preview some of the common questions we get as an office related to how to work with whistleblowers, and guidance that we could share to this broader kind of government community that's frankly relevant for anybody in a position of power who's maybe a legislative staffer receiving a disclosure from whistleblowers.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to jump in here. One question, there go the lights. One question we get fairly commonly is pretty foundational, which is just, what are Congress's obligations when they're working with a whistleblower or to work with whistleblowers? And we really like to say that, the golden rule is to try and maintain sort of a do no harm mentality, because at the end of the day, whistleblower disclosures are sensitive in nature and they need to be handled mindfully, because as we all know, retaliation is common. And frankly, even where a staffer is being incredibly conscientious, even where the whistleblower is following, every step, the letter of the law, and making a protected disclosure, missteps happen. And, the consequences of that can be someone fighting for their livelihood for decades on end to try and get their life back. So, technically speaking, whether an office moves forward with a whistleblower's disclosures is highly discretionary. Generally, it's going to be a capacity question for an individual office or a committee. There is a requirement within the House that a House employee not publicly disclose a whistleblower's identity or personally identifiable information, essentially without their consent. And, of course, there are restrictions around how an office would handle classified disclosures, things of that nature, for example. But, even where there's no legal obligation to work with a whistleblower, there's a reason why these partnerships are so common. Whistleblowers in Congress teaming up over the years have had, as you kind of previewed, Shanna, just an incredible positive impact that we reap in society. But even where there is no capacity within an office to move forward on a case, we do recommend that staff at least try to leave someone better off for having reached out. Maybe through resource sharing, for example, can be very helpful just to help an individual sort of find their way. And we also try to remind offices that whistleblowers are often going to be constituents reaching out for support or, disclosing something that's going on in the district. So maintaining that good relationship is also really important for, just good constituent relations as well. But of course, sometimes an office does want to dig in on something a whistleblower's brought forward and really kind of vet the allegations. So.
Well, yeah, let me jump in there, Becca, on that thread about vetting the allegations. That's another common question we get and guidance that we give is working through that process. That's if the office wants to dig in a little deeper, then we could lend some guidance along those lines. And one of the first things would be to advise the staff to listen to what the whistleblower's goals are. Just listening to what those goals are and processing them and understanding them could help inform the office on what their next steps are going to be. So that's a very, very important first step along those lines. Another key step for working forward on an investigation or an oversight matter like this would be to ask the whistleblower to do some homework, give them some assignments to help the staffer process this information better, like, preparing a timeline of the events or summarizing some of the key evidence. Those things will distill the case in the mind of the whistleblower, and then it will help impart that knowledge to the staffer too. And so it's a mutually beneficial loop that happens there as they do this exchange. And then the last thing that's a common thread that we will talk about is that asking the whistleblower, do they have legal counsel? And if they don't, experienced legal counsel too, in the matters of whistleblowing. And if they don't, suggest that they investigate, do some research to try to find some experienced legal counsel. One of the reasons for this is because working through legal counsel can help protect the communications between the whistleblower and where the disclosure is going, in this case to Congress, because it might invoke some attorney-client privilege there. And also it might facilitate some ways of sharing documentary evidence that in a more secure fashion as well. So these, and I think we're gonna touch later on in this conversation, we're gonna talk a little more about confidentiality. And then just to let you know, we do have some related resources on our website about protecting confidentiality too. With that, maybe Shanna was gonna, maybe I've stolen Shanna's thunder there.
Not at all. This is a fireside chat, our first one, but it's supposed to be informal. So let's keep this discussion going. And it is the perfect preview. We have a ton of public resources. We're a House-facing office, so we have to be clear about that. When it comes to providing our direct services, that's for the House staff. But a lot of our guidance is public on our website, like Congress's obligations when working with whistleblowers. That can be accessed on our website. We'll see if we can put it somehow in the chat. Everything can be found on our website, needless to say, which is whistleblower.house.gov. I think we have CHA to thank for such an easy name to remember, whistleblower.house.gov. So Congress's obligations when working with whistleblowers, as well as kind of quick tips on protecting whistleblower confidentiality, as well as vetting their disclosures. We have videos on both of those topics, and we'll keep flagging resources as they come up. I do just want to acknowledge and touch on two themes that have already been raised. One is the importance of constituent services, and two is the importance of Congress reclaiming its Article 1 responsibilities, its constitutionally mandated kind of duties, right? And this is incredibly timely for many reasons. We'll just acknowledge that both Khalil and Tim's bosses sit on the Select Committee for the Modernization of Congress, which has a number of important recommendations and initiatives taking place every day. They recently passed advanced nearly 30 bipartisan recommendations. Speaking of the bipartisan, collaboration taking place right now in the House and in Congress. And those are largely focused around those two themes: how to better serve constituents and how to strengthen Congress's robust oversight responsibilities. So you'll be hearing those as recurring themes when we discuss kind of the importance of working with whistleblowers today, and how, frankly, Congress's effective work with these individuals is at the core and heart of those initiatives. So with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Khalil and Tim, and continuing with the theme of bipartisan support. We heard in the opening remarks prior to our fireside chat that today was established through a bipartisan resolution, bipartisan, unanimously passed, that wants to honor whistleblowers, right? And it was founded in the first whistleblower law passed back in the Continental Congress that Steve loves to discuss, but it's important. This was unanimous from the start, the support for these individuals, all the way to our office's establishment, with the great bipartisan support we've had. We continue to see this as a recurring theme. Now, when it comes to our office, we're not so much bipartisan as we are nonpartisan, right? We're supposed to play that nonpartisan support role within the House to meet the needs of staff when they're working with whistleblowers, to meet them where they are. And a lot of that has to do, frankly, with institutionalizing these best practices, which has been a big push, we know, by your committee, by CHA to institutionalize best practices when it comes to technology, when it comes to constituent services, a number of different initiatives, and by the Select Committee on the Modernization for Congress. So with that, I'll get to the question, which is, we wanted to ask, in what ways do you feel the establishment of a nonpartisan support office such as ours is able to kind of fill that need in institutionalizing guidance that can really stick in the House, especially given the high turnover that we see on a regular basis? Khalil, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Shanna. The House it's a very, very transient place. It not only from Congress to Congress, but from month to month, week, day to day, it looks different. Right? It looks different today than it looked, than it did yesterday. But the one thing that generally sticks around is quality, right? So it doesn't matter who's in charge. It doesn't matter who's chairing what committee. Quality product that helps our members and our committees do their work lasts, right? And that's one thing that I think you and your team have provided to us. And that's why I think it'll be institutionalized. And I think no matter what happens in the 118th, 119th, 120th, whatever, the guidance that the Ombuds office has provided to the community will have real lasting effect.
I agree with that. And Shanna, I think you hit a lot of important points about this moment in time where strengthening Article 1, Section 1 is top of mind for a lot of folks, including the 12 members of Congress that serve on the Select Committee on Modernization. And there's been a lot of outside stakeholders engaged on that. And a lot of that is focused on reclaiming some powers that Congress is ceded to the executive branch, and also overseeing a branch of government that is exponentially larger and has more resources than the legislative branch, and whistleblowers are an important part of that. And so I completely agree with all of that. Another thing to add that I think your office has done effectively well, and that is tailored your approach depending upon where the offices are. And you hit on meeting offices where they are, rather than trying to pull them to one cookie cutter place for everybody. And so taking the time, being thoughtful, being strategic about what are the goals of various offices, and then seeing where your office can fit in to help support them in furthering those goals. And so I think that has been key. And then just the amount of reach out and touch points. We've had conversations over the last couple of years with setting goals of contacting each office twice a year, even more than that. And with the high turnover of staff that's been mentioned, that's critical. Half of the battle is just letting people know where the resources are. And so the frequency that you've continued to have your outreach, I think, has been part of the success as well.
Thank you both. We're going to start blushing over here. We promise this wasn't intended to be a let's pat our office on the back. But your feedback means an immense amount to us, because we're constantly in a process of trying to improve and figure out with thousands of employees and a high staff turnover rate, how are we reaching everyone? And that frankly is only possible through close coordination with the other House support offices, many of which are under CHA's jurisdiction, the Committee on House Administration's jurisdiction. And from our perspective, that's how this guidance is going to be institutionalized, right? Is making sure it sticks within offices so that they're prepared and they have the tools when they're hearing from whistleblowers around their concerns and their desired level of confidentiality and whatever it may be, that they know where to start in working effectively and safely with them, or they know where to turn if they need more support and resources to do so. So it's such a team effort, and it's only possible with that close coordination with the other House support offices. And you've helped us to navigate that. So then I'm going to kick it back over, and then we are going to open it up in a few minutes to questions. So please be submitting your questions, and they'll be coming our way. But I'm going to kick it over to the team to kind of look at one of our closeout questions at this stage. It's frankly for the team, and it's also for Khalil and Tim, which is, as we talked about in the opening, today's event honors whistleblowers. And in honoring them, we do need to continue to remember the immense risk that they take in coming forward. Again, we benefit from their knowledge, but they have to live with the potential years of retaliation that could result. And for that role, we feel strongly that part of our responsibility as an office is to advise Congress on how it can both work with the whistleblowers' disclosures to conduct oversight, while also protecting them at the same time, making sure that they're standing by their sources. And there are a number of quick tips and strategy that folks may be able to take away today that can reinforce your initiatives to support your sources while also benefiting from their knowledge. So I was going to ask the team if they could speak to that, kind of the ways in which we coach Congress in this space. And then if CHA could speak a little bit to kind of why this is important as a principle from your perspective, either direct or indirect experience, or anything else that you want to touch on for some of these closeout remarks before we open it up to the audience. So let me pass it to my team internally to get us started.
Yeah, thanks, Shanna. So, I mean, thinking about reputation makes me think about relationships. And that's one of the ways that we frame how an office or a committee might be working with a whistleblower as a relationship. And we put it under this umbrella of the follow-up stage. And, it involves things like, managing expectations and also increasing the flow of information over time, so that as time goes by, there's still an exchange of information going back and forth between the office and the whistleblower. And one of the things that this facilitates is new evidence that might be coming into the office. So and then I mentioned managing expectations, and I just wanted to follow up with one other high-level thing, is a checklist that we have about how to process some of the best practices for processing this follow-up stage. And then at a more specific level, at a lower level, we talk about the ground rules that the office establishes with the whistleblower to help protect the information. And that includes identifying what confidentiality methods and processes does the whistleblower want? How much confidentiality do they want? And then establishing boundaries around the use of their information in collaboration with the whistleblower. Build this idea about, like, how is this information going to be used? How is your office going to use this information? And then additionally, of course, what are the matters of consent, of obtaining consent for when you share this information somewhere else? And then last one of these ground rules that I'll touch on is the one about screening information. So when you are going to share any information outside of an office, screen it for quality control and for confidentiality. And these are the practices that help build this relationship and ensure this, protection, and that fosters this reputation of the office and the house, for that matter, then being a safer place to come for whistleblowers.
Yeah. And I mean, just to jump in a little bit, sometimes, part of our best practices guidance is really on kind of really practical sort of advice and tips for ensuring whistleblower confidentiality, especially through a staffer's kind of vetting process, where you need to preserve the whistleblower's identity, but still investigate what they're alleging, what they're bringing forward. So we say things, for example, like staff individuals should be using their official work devices, official, house accounts, for example, to communicate with whistleblowers, even using, encrypted secure channels. So like the Signal app, for example, to communicate things like that. That really practical guidance is also, part of what we try to give to staff.
And just following up, Becca, one other thing that helps to build this reputation idea is to share the survival tips that we have with the whistleblower, and especially the ones that talk about secure communications and talk about securing the evidence, but from the whistleblower's point of view, that to emphasize to them that there are steps that they can take in terms of secure comms and securing evidence that will help protect confidentiality. And then all of that, as much as you're protecting this information on both ends, you're helping to improve this relationship and ensure that this reputation is a solid reputation going forward.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, just to add on a little bit is that, sometimes it's not always going to be preventative. In other words, sometimes a whistleblower will come to an office, they're already facing retaliation by the time they reach out, or, they may start to experience or anticipate retaliation kind of as they're working with an office. And there are also actions that an office can take, to really support the whistleblower in that case and help to fend off the retaliation. For example, they may want to remind an employer that individuals have a right to communicate with Congress, and assert that retaliation isn't going to be tolerated by them. So they could send a letter to that effect, for example. And we have templates of that kind of letter that we often provide to staff that they may want to build off of. And just picking up that thread, talking about Congress's Article 1, authorities and responsibilities. Remember that Congress has the power of the purse, right? So where federal funding is concerned, there are also anti-gag protections in place that, make very clear that an employee has the right to speak out, and that their whistleblowing rights supersede a restriction on an employee's right to speak out. And there are even federal laws that can pull an employee's salary if they're found to have retaliated against a whistleblower. Now, of course, it's important, and we remind offices that it's critical that they're working with the whistleblower before they would take any kind of action like this. But I do think that employing these strategies can help to build an important precedent of Congress really standing by its sources.
Thanks, team. And in that respect, we do have a related guidance document on our website for holding retaliators accountable, which cites some of those statutes and points to letters and templates that can be used to get started by a member office or a committee. And it builds off of the good work already done to date by bipartisan congressional support for whistleblowers. So let me kick it back over to our friends in CHA and see if you have anything to add on that note or others.
Sure. I just wanted to mention one thing. A lot of my comments, really all of my comments so far have been geared towards big picture and our oversight responsibilities with your office, but we've also been a customer. We've used your office on a number of occasions and on two specific initiatives that we wanted to create a way for folks, if they had information to come forward and to speak with us. One of those had to do with security matters in the Capitol Police, and one had to do with the use of federal funds around elections. And our interactions were very professional. The end product, the portal that we set up, was great. The training our staff went through was really good, and we heard from some really important people. But for the second initiative, the one dealing kind of internally to the legislative branch, it was eye-opening how few protections legislative branch employees have from being retaliated against. And when you compare what they have to the executive branch, it is not even or equal. And so that's been eye-opening to me, and that's something longer term we're certainly interested in addressing. So I thought I'd mention.
Thanks, Tim. I'll piggyback off of that, but Khalil, it's really you're up if you have anything further to share.
Yeah, I do want to touch on something you mentioned a couple times, Shanna, and that is the immense risk that comes with whistleblowing. And so I think when we were standing up the office, part of the impetus there was that we have a responsibility to ensure that if somebody is coming forward to make a disclosure to their member of Congress or to a committee, and they are burdening themselves with that risk, then we owe it to them to make sure it's a safe, professional place to come, right? So it goes both ways. And again, it's a credit to your office for helping us fulfill that responsibility.
Thanks, Khalil. Thanks, Tim. And we can't stress enough how privileged we feel to be in a position to stand up this office. We were given an incredibly clear mandate, which is to advise the House, we're House facing, on its work working with whistleblowers, with whistleblowers. And our guidance, our lessons learned, our best practices, they're informed from the whistleblower rights community who's on the front lines, often representing whistleblowers, and also from whistleblowers directly, who we've had the privilege to work with over the years prior to joining the House, to kind of funnel those lessons and those needs into our training and our guidance for Congress. At the same time, it's informed by the longstanding kind of best practices and lessons learned from congressional staffers who have been doing this for decades, who know what does and doesn't work when it comes to building that effective working relationship with those we rely so heavily on. So we can't stress enough how grateful we are for this opportunity. And going back to Tim's point about kind of the discrepancy between rights available to the executive branch and those for the legislative branch, from our perspective, that's an education opportunity. Our office, to be very clear, we're not in a position to advocate for legislative reform, but we can provide technical expertise and guidance if an office is ever working on a whistleblower bill, and we can point toward bipartisan best practices that are very, very standard in whistleblower legislation. But Tim did, raise a point that's a reality, and for anybody who's interested in knowing what bills have been introduced, we do have a legislative tracker that has bipartisan whistleblower legislation on it. You can find it on our website. I think there are over 5 bipartisan bills at this time pending, having to do with protecting those who raise COVID, wasteful spending concerns, to creating parity with executive branch and contractor employees. And there have been initiatives over the year. Grassley will be, talking later today. He's time and again introduced legislation trying to create legislative branch whistleblower protections, as has Representative Spear and other members in Congress. So for anybody who does want to get involved on that front, that's not where our office plays a role, unless an office needs technical expertise around a bill. But those organizing this, this week's summit, the Good Government Whistleblower Support Organizations, NWC spoke to their initiatives, Make It Safe Coalition, Government Accountability Project, POGO. They're the folks to reach out to for further guidance in that space. So we just wanted to add a PS on that one. Good deal. Well, at this point, we're at 3:08 and we want to see what questions we're getting from the audience. So we'll look and see what's coming our way on that front. And I'll be kind of keeping an eye out on my phone. I think that's how we're going to receive any questions, but I'm going to go ahead with the time we have and pose a question to the team, which has to do with kind of this theme around how to make sure whistleblowers are better off when they reach out to Congress. Even if an office may not have the capacity to fully investigate their disclosures, how does staff make sure that they're still leaving them with something that can help point them in the right direction? And this is kind of a two-pronged question, because in the spirit of oversight and teaming up with whistleblowers to advance Congress's Article 1 responsibilities, in what ways can an office then partner more closely with the whistleblower at that follow-up stage to conduct its oversight? So the first question is, how do you leave them better off? Even if you don't know if you're going to proceed in working with them or not. And then the second question is, if you are going to work with them, how can you put them to work to have an impact and really make your oversight more effective? And then this is immediately for the team, but always welcome thoughts by the CHA folks as well, because you're experts too.
Sure. I mean, I can just kind of pick up on something that I mentioned earlier in passing, which is really that resource sharing can be so critical for leaving someone better off, even if it's, an issue that your office, it's not within your jurisdiction, or it's not something you have the capacity to take on. Helping someone to find the right path of an office or, a government entity that does have capacity to look into it can be incredibly powerful and useful for someone who may be kind of lost in a sea of government acronyms. So we have on our website, which is whistleblower.house.gov, it's kind of broken into 3 different sections. So one is a congressional audience page. So in other words, resources that are really tailored for our House audience. And then we have our whistleblower audience page, and then we have all resources. So that whistleblower audience page is often where we kind of direct staff for resources that they can share directly with their constituents or their sources. So we have, for example, on there, we have fact sheets that break down the different sectors of whistleblowing. So we have one on the Whistleblower Protection Act, for example, which is the primary executive branch law. Just kind of quick overviews of how the law functions. We have resources, governmental and non-governmental resources, kind of survival tips and guides, best practices for working with Congress. So, maybe a constituent reaches out to a member office, it's not something they're able to prioritize. They may want to redirect that person to a committee. Here's some best practices for working with that committee. So those kinds of resources really can make a huge difference in someone's life, and help them find knowledgeable counsel, as well as John was talking about earlier.
I'll try to answer the second part of that question, Shanna, one thing I was thinking of when you asked that was to move forward with a whistleblower for oversight, thinking about this Article 1, responsibilities. One of the things the whistleblower is an expert, quite likely the whistleblower is an expert on the matter that they are bringing forward to Congress. And so one of their roles could be to help you fact check whatever information you're hearing from the other side, from the agency or from the employer or wherever it is. The whistleblower could be an expert fact checker for you. And then another thing is that if the office or the committee is going to be asking questions or asking for documents, the whistleblower can help formulate those ideas, whether they're questions for a hearing somewhere or whether it's a document request and you want to cast the net just right so that you capture the key documents. The whistleblower might be the perfect person to help craft that kind of thing. And then even being an expert, potentially being an expert on this matter, the whistleblower might be able to provide a consultation on policy matters as well. They might be able to tell provide some insights into relevant policies that would help advance the office's priorities. So that's just what came to mind with me, Shanna.
Thanks, team. Really helpful. And that's a preview of what will be our next video short, which is kind of teaming up with whistleblowers to advance Congress's oversight and Article 1 responsibilities. So stay tuned on that front. We did see some questions come through in the chat. I'm just going to clarify a few things based on the questions. And by chat, I mean they're going to my phone right now, team. So I'll be sharing them with you at the same time. One is there an office like ours in the Senate? Right now, there's not. We're House facing. We were established through the House rules package. So they're not able to establish offices or other rules that would impact the Senate. We're just House facing. Great clarifying question. We understand civil society has some related initiatives and conversations going in the Senate. The other question that I think it's good to clarify is kind of what happens if we receive information, the Office of the Whistleblower Ombuds, do we forward that to a relevant committee, CHA or others? And we need to be very clear about that. It's something I didn't clarify up front, but we're not able to, receive or forward on disclosures from individual whistleblowers. It's not in our jurisdiction or authority. We're not an intake office for whistleblowers. Going back to that rule of thumb, we also, though, want to make sure folks are better off if they reach out. So to Becca's point about that whistleblower audience page, that's something that we'll also share directly with individuals who may contact us seeking guidance to try to reorient them and let them know how to identify maybe the menu of committees of jurisdiction. We have a committee jurisdictional tool that will identify under which statute a whistleblower may be able to go to which committee. Or we have a number of governmental and non-governmental resources developed by the good groups organizing this week's events that you can easily access all in one location. So great clarifying question. We can't receive a whistleblower disclosure and we can't forward disclosures on. We're here simply to support the House in their work with you all, so they're prepared when you reach out to them, to a House member or committee office. Let me see, I have some other questions in here. While I'm pulling them up, if anybody has anything coming to mind that you want to be sharing or chiming in with, feel free to unmute yourselves. And we have about less than 15 minutes left here. Okay, yeah, Tim.
One thing I was going to mention, and that is we have a congressional transition coming up in a couple of months. And when we talk about institutionalizing best practices and services that are offered across the board, not just in the whistleblower space, attrition is part of that. And as we've seen through the last couple of congressional cycles, we're having pretty big classes. And so whereas you used to have members that served for decades, that's becoming less frequent. And so the result is the entire churn of the House occurs more rapidly. And so it's a long way of saying that as this office transitions into next Congress, you guys are going to have a huge opportunity to educate a big chunk of new members and all the staff that work for them. And so I think from a year's time from now, we're going to all be able to say that your office and the services that are offered and the value of protecting whistleblowers that members of Congress and their team place is going to be increased because of that transition that will be here in just a couple of months.
Thanks. That's really helpful. And, we'd be remiss not to express appreciation to you and Khalil and your committee for all of the new member orientation kind of programming that you put together every year. Feels like a thankless role, but I know it makes all the difference for those folks coming in, thinking back to those staffers. It may be for their first day on the job, or a member's just establishing their office and trying to figure out where do we start in making sure we have clear intake procedures when we hear from a potential whistleblower, right? Where do we start? And again, that goes back to exactly why our office was established, is so that folks don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. We can take the lessons learned and best practices that the whistleblower rights community and Congress have developed together and try to institutionalize that by making sure offices have the tools and the resources readily available so they're prepared for inquiries from whistleblowers, whether it's a freshman office or the chair of a committee who's been working this beat for decades, right? So with that, really appreciate the acknowledgement of what's ahead, and we're excited to stay busy. We're learning every day how we can improve, and we're figuring this out with every new office we work with. Becca, I see you're unmuted. Let me pass it over to you, and then we'll do another question from the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, those are both really excellent points. And I think it speaks to the value of that really mindful institutionalization that we're working on. Because as was said earlier, one of our services is we can help offices build out kind of their internal process, as rigorous or top level as they want to make it, for how they will handle whistleblower intake, so that everybody from the interns through, the staff director knows what to do when, a bunch of different whistleblowers come in, or when one whistleblower comes in. And I think, keeping in mind that high turnover in the House, and like Tim, you said, the larger freshman classes that are coming in of members, I think the value there is that, if we have helped maybe a staff director or a chief put together this robust intake program, and they want to change offices, or the folks who work with them change offices, they're taking that knowledge with them to the new freshman members. They're taking that knowledge with them to their new committee assignments. So my hope is that, we'll start to see that more and more, sort of, that knowledge kind of permeating throughout the House as folks kind of naturally move around.
I just like to say I'm sort of seeing this line between institutionalizing these practices, hopefully that's our vision, our distant vision. It's really institutionalizing these practices, and then that goes towards the reputation that the House has as a place that listens to and protects whistleblowers, and then that goes to Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution and the oversight responsibility.
Yeah, thanks, John, for threading that needle. I'm really appreciating this conversation. So kicking it back over to some of the questions we're getting. One of them was, has our office been made aware of any notable police whistleblower legislation that's pending? This was submitted by a police whistleblower, and again, we're not in a position to endorse or advocate for legislation, but we do have a legislative tracker that keeps a record of all related bills. There is a bipartisan bill that would improve rights for police whistleblowers. It's called the Special Inspector General for Law Enforcement Act, HR 6762. Again, the folks organizing the summit could give you more information, but that is a bipartisan initiative that's ongoing to our knowledge. Another question is, once a whistleblower is recognized, are there any benefits in terms of protections, awards, asylum, anything of that nature? Such an important question, and it's a big question. So let me kick it over to the team to see if either of you want to kind of kick us off in an initial response.
I grabbed the space bar before anybody else did. So I'll just say, it varies dramatically, right, across all kind of spectrums. There's lots of different laws that provide whistleblowing rights, and they have all kinds of different provisions in them and enforcement mechanisms. So it's very, very case by case specific. Just an enormous amount of variety in this patchwork.
Yeah. Just quickly piggybacking off of that, we have developed, because the rights vary across sectors. We heard legislative branch employees don't necessarily have the same rights that those in the executive branch have. And it varies between other sectors in the private sector as well. So we've developed, largely under Becca's leadership, a number of fact sheets around what rights are available to a whistleblower based on the sector they're in. Some of those, like in the private sector, do involve awards and bounties and things of that nature. Others involve, maybe strong rights against workplace retaliation. But most laws, part of our, our education when we're working with offices to make sure they're aware, nearly none of the U.S. whistleblower laws cover forms of criminal or civil retaliation. So even when a whistleblower is engaging in protected activity and lawfully communicating with Congress, they could still be subject to being placed under criminal investigation for, for instance, alleged theft of company property that evidences the misconduct, or maybe slapped with a defamation suit, a slap suit, which can be incredibly expensive and difficult to defend themselves against. So even where, arguably strong rights exist, there's still limitations to the landscape, which is why so much of our guidance is largely around developing digestible fact sheets so staff know where to look to understand what rights an employee they're working with may be covered under, but also to focus on the prevention to retaliation by best practices for protecting whistleblowers' confidentiality or defending a source, right, when they become subject to retaliation. Great. Really good dialogue. We have about 5 minutes left. We have a few more questions while I'm pulling them up. Let's see, kind of open it up to the team here if other thoughts are coming to mind that you'd like to comment on.
Well, I have a hard stop at 3:30, but I did want to say to those listening, as Khalil said on the top of the call, this office did come to be with just a few short lines of legislation, but it wouldn't have gotten to that point if it hadn't been for the outside stakeholders and outside advocacy groups and folks like you that have been pushing for this for a really long time. And frankly, Congress was resistant to it. But because you guys were persistent and insisted upon it and kept coming back, explaining why this needed to be, it wouldn't be here. And so it's been great to hear all the kind words about what we're doing here. But I did want to recognize for the broader group watching, we know that we wouldn't have gotten to this point if it hadn't been for the outside pressure from the stakeholder community.
Thanks, Tim. Really gracious remarks and well said. We couldn't have said them better. As much as we have the Committee on House Administration and the Rules Committee, and frankly, the Appropriations Committee, I think for our existence, it was the push from the whistleblower rights community that saw the need for an office this nature that helped to also make it possible. So with that, let me go ahead and see if we can get maybe a closeout question for the last few minutes we have. Just making sure I see what's going on in the chat here. And thanks, folks. I think with that, we're going to go ahead and kind of open it up to see if there are any closing words that our speakers may have. Tim gave some really thoughtful ones about the support of the whistleblower rights community, but any kind of closing words of wisdom, insights for those listening today, whether they're government officials, congressional staff who may be working with whistleblowers, or whether whistleblowers themselves or their advocates who may be tuning in, that you think are worth passing on.
Yeah, I very much want to associate myself with Tim's comments and thank the outside stakeholders that brought this to our attention and made sure that it wasn't ignored. And again, I want to thank, relative to other House offices, you're a very small operation. 3 people. We're working on giving you some more capacity. But in the House community, you're a very small office with a big task. And you do it exceedingly well. So again, just thank you to the whistleblowers, thank you to the whistleblower advocates, and thank you to the ombuds, and thanks to Tim for his partnership in making a successful enterprise.
You're both such a classy demonstration of really bipartisan commitment to making the House function. And I meant it when I said we couldn't think of two more committed folks to serve with and to help us operate effectively. So thank you for your kind words. Thank you again to the whistleblower rights community, to NWC, and everybody else organizing this week and fighting the good fight. Thank you to the whistleblowers who are out there and who have courageously spoken up to protect us and protect the public. And let me thank my team again for all the work that Becca, you and John, you do, and see if you have any closing remarks as well before we wrap up with our final 2 minutes here.
No, I would just thank NWC and thanks to Khalil and Tim for joining us, and just echo the sentiments. I think the creation of our office, it's been very bipartisan, and we've been able to operate in such a great nonpartisan capacity, and it really just builds on that extremely bipartisan history of support for whistleblowers and whistleblowing in Congress. We know that nearly all the modern statutes pass with bipartisan, if not unanimous, consent in Congress. And how many issues can you say that about, frankly? So it's been a real privilege.
Thank you to our hosts, and thank you to Khalil and Tim for great leadership.
Yep. And we'd also be remiss not to recognize the good work of the chairwoman, Zoe Lofgren, and Rodney Davis, ranking member of CHA as well, for the support for our office. So Siri, right on time, we'll pass it back over to you, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you, everyone. I am just so inspired by that fireside chat. I hope it was incredibly informative for all of our attendees. The House Ombuds office for the House Office for the Whistleblowers Ombuds is one of my favorite offices on the Hill. They're so essential to making sure that communication is smooth and complete, educating our members in the House of Representatives and communicating with whistleblower stakeholders. This is day one of National Whistleblower Center's National Whistleblower Day celebration. We have brought together so many incredible experts this year, and that was our first cohort of them. So I'm so happy that we got to have the House Office of the Whistleblowers Ombuds open for us today.